Steve, it's really tricky, isn't it? You know, on the one hand, we're talking about a conflict in which people are in danger, people have died, people are being injured. But also, this is a really seismic international economic event.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, just going back to that kind of uncertainty word again, it's like you've kind of outlined some of the potential outcomes, but we're not entirely sure what it's going to be. Obviously, our kind of most recent reference point is 2022, the invasion of Ukraine and the concerns there. But there's just the real unclarity of how long this is going to last from both sides of the conflict. But if you can even just say the both sides, you know, there's such a lack of clarity from the US about their aims to a certain extent. What is the off-ramp on this, which is going to lead in even further to kind of worries about how this kind of crisis ends.
Steve, this is part of the issue, isn't it? That that potentially this is going to push up prices for people. That might then push up inflation. In fact, let's just hear a quick clip, actually, about how the war might affect the Bank of England's rates decision on the 19th of March. Because Jonathan Haskell is a professor of economics at Imperial College Business School, and he was one of the Bank of England's rate setters until 2024.
I think the important thing is that in positions of uncertainty like this, the value of waiting becomes very large to see what will actually turn out and whether this oil price increase will be sustained. So my view is the committee will be cautious and they might well hold off on having a cut at the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks, contrary to what people expected before all this happened, when people thought that there would be a cut.
Steve, explain what the central bank in the UK and maybe across the world might be thinking.
I basically kind of agree with Jonathan Haskell. There's the kind of question of whether they want to think, is this just going to be a short-term shock? And if they hold when they were previously going to cut, there's an argument of kind of causing some economic harm that doesn't need to be done. But there's, as we've already kind of talked about, that short-term question is really unclear. And so they don't want to get to the point where prices are almost getting embedded. People expect price rises, and then we get into the kind of doom loop, close to where we saw around about 2022, 2021, where people expect higher inflation and therefore inflation is higher, and then the bank has to start raising interest rates again. So it's an invidious position for them to be in. So I would expect that they'll probably hold at the next meeting.
A doom loop, of course, is the worst kind of loop for the economy. But I suppose a lot of people, Steve, will be listening and thinking, well, hang on, if my price, if my costs go up because of rising, the potential for energy costs, fuel costs to go up, that doesn't mean that I'm suddenly spending with wild abandon and pushing up inflation elsewhere. That actually means I've got less money to spend. So, people might feel like maintaining interest rates to sort of guard against inflation doesn't really make much sense at a time like this.
No, it always feels quite counterintuitive, but to a certain extent, it's a feature rather than the bug of the policy. The idea is to suppress is the wrong word, but kind of calm down the economy in many ways. But mostly, you can think of it in a signalling way. So the Bank of England would be maintaining, or even in the worst outcome, raising interest rates to signal we are taking inflation seriously. And therefore, when it comes to price setting, decisions, wage negotiations, people expect that inflation isn't going to get out of hand again. If they don't have that signal from the Bank of England, there's a risk that these expectations get embedded. So it feels like, basically the bank is pouring fuel on a kind of unpleasant fire in terms of people's kind of disposable income. But there's a rationale behind it.
Harriet, and of course, with the developing news, it was perhaps potentially already a slightly out-of-date statement by the time the Chancellor was able to give it, but she did give Rachel Reeves a positive outlook on the new forecasts from the Office of Budget Responsibility that were published alongside the statement.
Today, The new forecasts from the Office of Budget Responsibility show that our plan is the right one. Yeah. Inflation is down. Borrowing is down. Living standards are up and the economy is growing.
Well, the OBR and the Chancellor did acknowledge that that the ongoing war could affect some of these. I mean, Steve, we had that quite rosy picture of the UK economy, didn't we? And yet there is this big looming global event potentially breathing down the Chancellor's neck.
Yeah, I mean, there was definite vibes of the March budget back in 2020 where Rishi Sunak stood up and basically was talking about a world that in many senses didn't exist anymore. If you look at the OBR report on Tuesday, which as a fun and crazy guy, that's what I spent my Tuesday night doing.
And that's why we love you here on Wake Up to Money.
A lot of the assumptions around kind of gas prices and oil prices that go into that report are considerably lower than they are kind of now. Now, again, we've talked about if this is a short-term effect, maybe that's fine, but it's kind of unlikely. Yeah, in general, if like kind of going away from that, the main story about the report is kind of not much has changed since the last budget in November, which, given that that's only 3 or so months, it's not a massive surprise. There's a little bit downward growth that was expected, but the long run outturn is basically the same. But there's no kind of real fundamental change in the outlook for the economy. And there's certain things in there that are kind of like at least flashing on the dashboard. I think one of the things is kind of like linked to everything we're talking about this way is defence spending. There's a kind of maybe a need for it to be increased by 40 billion by 2035. That's not a real indication of how that's going to get paid for. And there's lots of other things like that, the sense that a lot of the budgeting in the spending envelope is kind of backloaded to the end of the Parliament. How realistic is that really? That's before we even get into questions of, do we need another energy bailout? Again, going back to 2022, we have the history of the government stepping in. But we are in a slightly worse kind of debt position than we are there. There's a question of, is the kind of government strong enough politically to resist demands for that kind of bailout? So the uncertain word is going to be used again, so you can ring your klaxon. But it hasn't really. We're no much more clearer, even though we've got kind of updated figures from the OBR.
Okay, that is going to have to be the end of. I mean, we could talk for the rest of the programme, couldn't we, about all the events that are going on. I think I'm going to finish this section of the show, though, asking you all for another word. I think give me the word for the main thing that you'll be looking out for over the next 7 days. Steve?
I'm going to make up a word. I'm going to go for grown-upness. A lot of the rhetoric around the conflict, it just feels really dispiriting. It would be nice to have less of that.
Grown-upness. I like it. Right, that's been a fascinating chat. Thank you all so much for it. Harriet, Zoe, stick around. Lots more to talk about. But Steve, this is where we let you crack on with your Friday and going off to be a grown-up. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks. See you soon.
See you soon. Steve Nolan there, lecturer in economics at Liverpool John Moores University.